In February of 1994, Fortune magazine named Rubbermaid the most admired corporation in America. 12,000 employees, 5,000 products, 400 new items every year, faster than 3M, faster than Apple, faster than Intel. The company had started with 9 men, $26,800, and a factory that made toy balloons in a small Ohio city. 74 years later, it sat at the summit of American business. Nobody inside those walls could see what was coming. The price of their only raw material was about to double. Their largest customer was about to turn on them, and the 5% price increase that seemed so reasonable, so modest, so justified, would set off a chain of events that erased the company from the town it had called home for 80 years. There is a building on Akron Road in Wooster, Ohio, that stretches longer than some towns are wide, a concrete block complex with a parking lot that runs all the way to the road, built for a world that expected it to last forever. For the better part of half a century, this was one of the largest plastics processing plants in the United States. 45 Husky injection presses cycling day and night, the hiss of pneumatics, the mechanical thud of molds clamping shut, the warm petrochemical smell of polyethylene resin being heated and shaped into things people used every single day. Trash cans, food containers, laundry baskets, storage totes, the bright primary colored products of American domestic life, stamped with a name that every household in the country recognized: Rubbermaid. At its peak, more than 1,400 workers passed through those gates every morning. They came from Wooster and the surrounding towns, Orrville, Smithville, Shreve, Rittman, driving through the rolling hills of Wayne County in the dark before dawn, headlights sweeping across farmland, pulling into that enormous lot while the factory hummed and glowed against the Ohio sky. They worked the presses. They ran the molds. They packed and shipped products to every state in the Union and 24 countries beyond. And they did it for a company that Fortune magazine, after polling 10,000 of America's most senior executives and financial analysts, called the single most admired corporation in the United States. Not the most admired manufacturer, not the most admired plastics company, the most admired corporation, period. Above Coca-Cola, above Johnson & Johnson, above Microsoft, Intel, 3M, and Procter & Gamble. For 2 consecutive years, no company in America ranked higher than the one headquartered in this small city of 24,000 people, 50 miles south of Cleveland. That was 1994. Today, the Rubbermaid name still appears on products in every Walmart in America. Thinner products, lighter products, made somewhere else. The company that bore the name is gone, absorbed, dismantled, erased from the town it called home for 80 years. The schools that Rubbermaid's taxes funded laid off 90 teachers and closed a building. The store on Public Square that sold Rubbermaid products for 3 decades shut its doors for the last time in 2021. The workforce that once numbered in the thousands was reduced to 110, and then to 0. What happened on Akron Road is not a story about a company that made bad products or lost touch with its customers. It's a story about what happens when the most powerful retailer on earth decides that your prices are too high, and you're foolish enough to disagree. But to understand how Rubbermaid died, you have to understand what Rubbermaid was. And that story begins more than 100 years ago, with 9 men, $26,800, and a factory that made toy balloons. In May of 1920, 9 businessmen in Wooster, Ohio, pooled everything they could scrape together, $26,800 in startup capital, and incorporated a company called the Wooster Rubber Company. The original plan had been to call it the Good Rubber Company, But when two of the founders, T.E. Rice and A.L. Ebert, traveled to Columbus to register the name, they found it already belonged to another Ohio firm. They changed it on the spot. The Wooster Rubber Company, named for the town because the town was all they knew. Their product was toy balloons, sold under the brand name Sunshine, and for most of the 1920s the business worked. Wooster was a small city of roughly 7,000 people, a farm country seat surrounded by the gentle terrain of northeast Ohio, and the balloon factory gave it a modest manufacturing identity. By the late 20s, Wooster Rubber had built a new factory and office building on East Bowman Street and seemed to be finding its footing. Then, 1929 arrived. And the thing about toy balloons is that they're the very first purchase a family eliminates when there isn't enough money for bread. The Depression didn't just slow demand, it obliterated it. By the early 1930s, the company that those 9 men had built was dying. What saved it wasn't a business strategy or a capital infusion. It was a man and his wife sitting at their kitchen table in New England, sketching rubber household products while the country fell apart around them. James R. Caldwell had worked at the Seamless Rubber Company in New Haven, Connecticut, and he understood the material the way a craftsman understands wood. Its properties, its possibilities, its stubborn refusal to behave like anything else. In 1933, at the very bottom of the Depression, Caldwell and his wife Madeline conceived 29 rubber household products. The first was a red rubber dustpan. It cost $1. The metal dustpans sitting in every hardware store in America cost 39 cents. Caldwell's pitch was simple and physical. His dustpan wouldn't bend, wouldn't warp, wouldn't dent. It made full contact with the floor every single time. It worked better, and it would last longer, and if you didn't believe him, he'd prove it on your doorstep. He named the enterprise Rubbermaid, rubber for the material, made for the job the products perform. And then he went door to door. Years later, in a 1974 New York Times interview, Caldwell recalled his early selling method with the plainness of a man who'd never needed to exaggerate. Rang 10 doorbells and sold 9 dustpans. 9 out of 10. In the depths of the worst economic catastrophe in American history, a man selling a dustpan at nearly 3 times the going price closed 90% of his cold calls. That tells you something about the product. It tells you more about the man. Caldwell expanded to soap dishes, sink plugs, and drainboard mats, selling through department stores throughout New England. And in July of 1934, a man named Horatio B. Ebert, one of 2 Aluminum Company of America executives who'd purchased Wooster Rubber as a personal investment back in the late 1920s, walked into a New England department store and spotted a display of Rubbermaid products. He saw what Caldwell had built. He saw what his struggling balloon company needed. He engineered a merger and brought James Caldwell to Wooster. The balloon line was retired entirely. The factory on East Bowman Street was retooled for Caldwell's household rubber goods. Caldwell became president of the combined firm, and what had been a failing novelty manufacturer became something else, a company built on the idea that everyday objects could be made better, that a dustpan or a dish rack or a drainboard mat deserved the same care and material quality as anything else in the American home. By 1935, the retooled company posted $80,000 in sales. By 1941, that number had climbed to $450,000, more than 5-fold growth in 6 years. 27 of the 29 products the Caldwells had sketched in their kitchen had been brought to market. Every one of them bore the Rubbermaid name, though the corporation was still technically the Wooster Rubber Company. It would stay that way until 1957, when the brand had so completely eclipsed the corporate identity that the name change was a formality everyone already understood. But before any of that could happen, before Rubbermaid could become what it was destined to become. There was a war to survive. In May of 1942, the United States government halted civilian rubber production for the war effort. Overnight, Rubbermaid's housewares business ceased to exist. The factory that had been humming with Caldwell's kitchen products went quiet. All but approximately 16 workers were laid off. 16. From a workforce that had been growing every year, down to a skeleton crew in a matter of weeks. It was the second time in 12 years that the company had stared at its own extinction. First, the Depression killed the balloon business, and now the war killed the housewares business. Wooster Rubber had a talent for finding itself one bad quarter away from oblivion. But Caldwell was resourceful in the way that Depression-era entrepreneurs had to be. Within 6 months, he'd secured military production contracts, self-sealing rubber tops for warplane fuel tanks, then life jackets, then rubber tourniquets. The products that had once kept kitchen floors clean were replaced by products designed to keep pilots alive at 20,000 feet. The factory didn't just recover, it surged. Workers were recruited from surrounding towns. By 1944, the workforce exceeded 500 employees, larger than the company had ever been. That same year, in a gesture that seems almost quaint now, the company introduced an employee profit-sharing plan. It was 1944. The war wasn't over. The factory was running flat out on military contracts with no guarantee of what peacetime would bring. And management decided to share the profits with the people doing the work. That decision would echo through the next half-century of Rubbermaid's relationship with its workforce, a relationship built on the assumption, radical in retrospect, that the company and its workers were in this together. When the war ended, Rubbermaid went back to making housewares. But there's a small detail that captures something about those immediate post-war months. A detail almost too perfect for a documentary about a company that made brightly colored plastic household goods. In 1945, there were no coloring agents available. Lingering wartime shortages had dried up the supply. So, for several months, every single Rubbermaid product came off the line in black. Black dustpans, black dish racks, black drainboard mats. A company that would become synonymous with the cheerful primary colors of the American kitchen started its post-war life in monochrome, waiting for the world to catch up. The first full post-war year produced $2.5 million in sales. By 1949, that had doubled to $5 million. The little company that had nearly died twice was growing faster than ever. Two things happened in the 1950s that turned Rubbermaid from a successful regional manufacturer into something approaching an American institution. The first was plastics. In 1955, Wooster Rubber went public, offering stock on the over-the-counter market for the first time. The capital funded a complete retooling of the manufacturing operation for injection molded plastic products. The first was a molded plastic dishpan, introduced in 1956, and it was, in the understated language of company history, wildly popular. Plastics would eventually constitute more than 80% of Rubbermaid's sales. The rubber that had given the company its name and its identity was quietly supplanted by the material that would make it an empire. The second was a man named Donald Newell. Newell had joined Wooster Rubber in 1941 as what he called a temporary associate. He never left. After James Caldwell's retirement and a brief presidency by Forrest B. Shaw, Newell became president in 1959. The same year, Rubbermaid stock was listed on the New York Stock Exchange for the first time. He was disciplined, forward-thinking, and possessed by a single conviction that would define the company's culture for the next 4 decades. Rubbermaid must never stop inventing. In 1960, Newell set a goal of doubling the company's earnings every 6 years. It was the kind of target that sounds impressive in a boardroom, and impossible on a factory floor. He met it consistently for the entirety of his tenure. But Noble's most consequential decision wasn't a financial target, it was a cultural one. In 1968, he established the metric that became Rubbermaid's DNA. 30% of total annual sales must come from products introduced during the preceding 5 years. 30%. Every year. If your 5-year-old products were still selling, that was fine. But they couldn't be more than 70% of revenue. The remaining 30% had to be new. This forced perpetual reinvention at a pace that most consumer products companies would have considered reckless. Noble's research and development operation employed designers, engineers, and prototype craftsmen who tested ideas against thousands of consumers, compressing the cycle from drawing board to store shelf into approximately 8 months. The company broke ground on a vast new headquarters complex on Akron Road in 1960, combining corporate offices with the plastics manufacturing division. At the ceremony, Noble made a promise to the town that had been Rubbermaid's home for 40 years. This groundbreaking ceremony is symbolic of our faith in Wooster and the people of this community, and of our desire to continue to be a part of Wooster. The campus that rose on Akron Road would become one of the largest plastics processing plants in the United States. The old Bowman Street factory was left behind. The future was here, in a sprawling concrete complex surrounded by parking lots big enough to hold the cars of a workforce that grew larger every year. By 1964, Rubbermaid was a $32 million annual business. By 1967, operations had split into 2 divisions, home products in Wooster and commercial products in Winchester, Virginia. The Brute trash container, introduced in 1968, became an iconic product that's still in commercial use today. By 1974, the company sold 240 different items, with 1 in 10 introduced that year alone. Commercial and industrial products provided a quarter of all revenue. Noble retired around 1980 with sales approaching $350 million and a workforce that had grown from 731 in 1955 to well over 1,000 in Wooster alone. He later published his memoirs under a title that captured both his pride and his nostalgia. Like Only Yesterday. He'd set the clock that drove Rubbermaid's innovation engine. 30% new every 5 years, no exceptions, no excuses. His successor would take that engine and push it to speeds Noble never imagined. Stanley C. Galt's biography reads like it was written by someone trying to prove that Wooster, Ohio, could produce anything, including a titan of American industry. He was the son of Clyde Galt, one of the original 9 founders of the Wooster Rubber Company in 1920. Born and raised in Wooster, attended the College of Wooster, worked his way through school in a Rubbermaid plant, ran what he called the biggest paper route in town, 104 customers by the age of 12. He left Wooster for General Electric and spent 31 years as an executive there, rising high enough that he was in the final running for CEO, a job that went instead to a man named Jack Welch. When Galt returned to Wooster in 1980 to become Rubbermaid's chairman, Fortune magazine later found the only analogy that seemed adequate, as if Hank Aaron had gone back to his native Mobile and made its Double-A Bay Bears into the most luminous world-class baseball team anyone had ever seen. Wall Street didn't see it that way, not at first. Analysts joked that Galt could run Rubbermaid between 9 a.m. and noon, but wondered what he'd do after lunch. Dustpans and dish racks weren't exactly the stuff of corporate legend. They underestimated him profoundly. Galt worked 60 to 80 hours a week, starting before 7 in the morning. He spent weekends visiting hardware stores, personally noting if he found a Rubbermaid laundry basket with a label on crooked. He was described as relentlessly demanding in the GE style. The kind of executive who expected the same intensity from everyone around him that he demanded from himself. And the results were staggering. When Galt took over, Rubbermaid's annual revenue was roughly $300 million. Within 7 years, it crossed $1 billion and entered the Fortune 500. By 1990, it had reached $1.5 billion. Net income increased more than sixfold. Total shareholder return averaged 25% annually, year after year after year. A compounding engine that turned modest investments into small fortunes. The stock peaked at $38.25 on the last trading day of 1991. He didn't achieve this by squeezing more efficiency out of existing product lines. He achieved it by making Rubbermaid into something it had never been, a consumer products conglomerate. In 1984, he acquired Little Tikes, the beloved maker of children's toys and playground equipment. In 1985, Gott, the insulated cooler company. In 1986, Microcomputer Accessories. In 1990, Eldon, an office products manufacturer. Each acquisition expanded Rubbermaid's reach into a new corner of American life. And the innovation engine that Donald Noble had built? Galt pushed it harder. The company now aimed to produce approximately 400 new products annually and enter a new market category every 12 to 18 months. 400 new products a year. Faster than 3M. Faster than Apple. Faster than Intel. Fortune didn't just rank Rubbermaid as more innovative than those companies. It ranked Rubbermaid as the most innovative company in America. The product line swelled to more than 5,000 items. 4 major divisions: home products in Wooster, commercial products in Winchester, juvenile products through Little Tikes, and seasonal products through Gott. Each with its own identity, its own workforce, its own contribution to a revenue number that kept climbing. 43 consecutive years of dividend increases. A workforce of more than 12,000 people worldwide, with Wooster still at the heart of it. 1,400 to 1,600 workers on Akron Road, the company's largest single-site employer and the largest taxpayer in the city. Galt retired in 1991, having taken what Donald Noble built and turned it into an empire. He was named Rubber Industry Executive of the Year twice, once for Rubbermaid and once for Goodyear Tire and Rubber, where he immediately went to execute another turnaround. He died on June 29, 2016, at the age of 90. By then, the empire he'd built no longer existed. Imagine standing on the floor of the Akron Road plant in 1993. The complex is enormous, a concrete campus with its own internal geography, buildings connected by corridors and loading docks, the parking lot stretching to the road and filling before dawn. Inside, the air is warm and carries the particular smell of heated polyethylene resin, a sweet, faintly chemical scent that clings to clothing, that workers' families learn to recognize. That meant someone in the house worked at Rubbermaid. The injection molding machines stand in long rows, each one cycling with a rhythmic precision. The clamp of the mold, the hiss of the injection, the pause while the plastic sets, the release, a few seconds per cycle, thousands of cycles per shift. The sound isn't loud in the way a steel mill is loud. It's insistent, mechanical. A pulse that you feel in the soles of your feet as much as you hear. The products emerge in bright colors, red, blue, green, white, moving down the line to be trimmed, inspected, packed, and stacked on pallets. Trash cans, storage totes, food containers, laundry baskets, clear boxes with snap-on lids. The domestic inventory of American life, manufactured at a scale that would have been unimaginable to James Caldwell and his 29 kitchen sketches. Workers on the floor belong to United Steelworkers, Local 302. The relationship with management was functional, not without tension but not hostile. A 1976 strike involving 1,100 members had been settled amicably. In 1985, workers accepted a 3-year wage freeze in exchange for guarantees against mass layoffs. The profit-sharing plan that had been introduced in 1944 during wartime still operated. It was the kind of labor relationship built on a premise that both sides understood. The company needed these workers, and these workers needed this company, and the town needed both. Multi-generational employment was common. Fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, entire families whose working lives were organized around the shift schedule at Akron Road. The Wooster Digital History Project preserved an oral history of Rosella Steinbring, who worked at Rubbermaid for 37 years, from 1959 to 1997. 37 years. She started when Eisenhower was president and left the year before the company was sold. Her entire adult life measured in Rubbermaid shifts. Rubbermaid was more than Wooster's largest employer. It was the city's largest taxpayer, approximately $600,000 annually in payroll taxes to the city, roughly $1 million to the Wooster Public School District, nearly $304,000 in real estate taxes, and another $1 million in personal property taxes to Wayne County. The schools that educated Wooster's children, the roads that connected its neighborhoods, the services that made the city function, all of it depended, to a degree that no one wanted to examine too closely, on the continued prosperity of the company on Akron Road. But the civic presence went beyond taxes. In 1984, Rubbermaid restored the Walnut Street School into the Wayne Center for the Arts. In 1989, it built a United Way building for the city. On Public Square in the historic Quinby building, the Everything Rubbermaid store served as both a company outlet and a community landmark, a place where you could buy the products and feel the pride of knowing they were made right here, by people you knew, in a factory you could drive past on your way to work. In a city of 22 to 24,000 people, Rubbermaid wasn't just an employer. It was an identity. When someone from Wooster met someone from out of town, and the conversation turned to, "Where are you from?" the answer wasn't just Wooster. It was Wooster, where they make Rubbermaid, as if the town and the company were the same sentence, as if one couldn't be explained without the other. In early 1994, Fortune magazine published its annual survey of America's most admired corporations. The poll wasn't a popularity contest. It was an exhaustive evaluation. More than 10,000 senior executives, outside directors, and financial analysts rating companies across 8 categories: innovation, management quality, product quality, financial soundness, long-term investment value, talent development, community responsibility, and use of corporate assets. The survey was conducted by the Hay Group Consultancy, with participants polled from October through December and results published in the February issue. Rubbermaid had been in the top 10 for a full decade, from 1985 through 1994. It had been number 2 for 5 of the preceding 6 years. And now, in February of 1994, the result was final. Number 1. The most admired corporation in America. The article that accompanied the ranking carried a headline that captured everything Rubbermaid had been building toward for 74 years. America's most admired company. It's Rubbermaid, master of the mundane and a champion innovator. Here's why this maker of dustpans and drain boards is so highly regarded. Master of the mundane. That was the genius of it. Nobody dreamed about dustpans. Nobody talked about storage containers at dinner parties. But Rubbermaid had taken the humblest objects in the American home and treated them with a seriousness, a relentlessness of design, testing, and improvement that companies making satellites and supercomputers would have envied. 400 new products a year. 30% of revenue from items less than 5 years old. a new product category every 12 to 18 months, an innovation pace that outran 3M, Apple, and Intel. Rubbermaid held the #1 position again when the next survey was published in early 1995. 2 consecutive years, the highest peak any consumer products company had reached in the history of the ranking. A 1994 Baylor University study of consumer goodwill ranked Rubbermaid the second most powerful brand in America. The company had been named one of the best managed companies in America by Business Month in 1988 and had received the Thomas Edison Award for improving people's lives through innovative solutions. Every measurement pointed the same direction, up. The man accepting the honor was Wolfgang Schmidt. Born in Koblenz, Germany in 1944, Schmidt had joined Rubbermaid as a product manager in 1966, spent his entire career there, risen through housewares to the executive suite, and become CEO in 1992 and chairman in 1993. He stood before the business press and spoke on behalf of what he called all 12,201 Rubbermaid associates around the globe, pledging to create the best total value for our customers and consumers. He set targets worthy of the ranking: $4 billion in sales, international revenue growing from 11% to 25 or 30% of the total. The ambition was enormous. The confidence was absolute. Revenue stood at approximately $2.17 billion. Net income had reached roughly $228 million, a record. The global workforce numbered 12,201. In Wooster alone, 1,400 to 1,600 people reported to the Akron Road campus every day. The stock, after peaking at $38.25 under Galt, remained a blue-chip holding. 43 consecutive years of dividend increases, more than 5,000 products on shelves across the country. This was the summit. February 1994. The single highest point in the 80-year history of a company that 9 men in a small Ohio city had started with $26,800 and a dream about toy balloons. But here's the thing about summits. You can't see the other side until you're standing right at the edge. And by the spring of 1994, the very season Rubbermaid was being celebrated as the finest corporation in America. The forces that would destroy it were already in motion. The entire product line, all 5,000 items, depended on polyethylene resin. Every trash can, every storage tote, every food container, every laundry basket, all of it derived from a single petrochemical commodity whose price Rubbermaid could not control. The premium pricing that consumers had accepted for decades assumed a level of brand loyalty that had never been tested under real pressure. Distribution was already unreliable. Retailers were complaining about fill rates and shipping delays. And the man now running the company for all his years of service was temperamentally the opposite of Stanley Galt. Where Galt had walked factory floors and straightened labels, Schmidt was described by former managers as autocratic, someone who created a tense environment where people feared making mistakes. A former manager later told the press plainly, "He destabilized the company and surrounded himself with yes people. All the entrepreneurial spirit left." None of this was visible to the outside world in February of 1994. The fortune ranking glowed. The numbers gleamed. Wooster had never had more reason to be proud, and the price of resin was about to double. In the spring of 1994, polyethylene resin prices began to climb. It didn't happen all at once. Commodity markets rarely deliver their worst news in a single morning. The price ticked up through the summer, driven by tightening global petrochemical supply, rising demand, and instability in the oil markets that fed the entire plastics supply chain. By autumn, it was clear this wasn't a seasonal fluctuation. By the following year, resin prices had doubled from their pre-spike levels. For most manufacturers, a doubling of raw material costs is a crisis. For Rubbermaid, it was an existential threat because Rubbermaid wasn't most manufacturers. Every single one of its 5,000 products was made from polyethylene resin. Every trash can, every tote, every food storage container, every laundry basket, the entire empire, from the Wooster plant to the commercial division in Winchester to the global operations Schmidt was building, ran on a single commodity whose price had just been cut loose from anything resembling predictability. The estimated cost to Rubbermaid in 1995 alone was $250 million. To put that in perspective, the company's peak net income, the best year it had ever had, was $228 million. The resin spike didn't just erase the profit, it exceeded it. This was not a new vulnerability. Rubbermaid had been rocked by a resin scare during the 1974 energy crisis, which caused a significant profit drop even as sales continued to rise. But in the 2 decades since, nobody had addressed the structural problem. The company had diversified its product line into 5,000 items across 4 divisions and a dozen countries. But every one of those products was hostage to the same volatile molecule. The innovation engine that Donald Noble built and Stanley Galt supercharged had produced 400 new products a year, all of them made from the same material. Diversification of everything except the one thing that mattered most. Every plastics manufacturer in America faced the same cost pressure. The difference that would determine who survived and who didn't, was in how they responded. Wolfgang Schmidt's decision was straightforward, and by the logic of traditional brand management, it made perfect sense. Rubbermaid would pass the increased costs along to retailers through price hikes, averaging approximately 5% across its product lines. Dish racks, waste paper baskets, storage containers, the full range, everything would go up. The assumption, as the Chicago Tribune later reported, was simple. People stick with a brand they know. 5%. On a $10 trash can, that's 50 cents. On a $5 food container, a quarter. The increases were modest by any historical standard. Rubbermaid had spent 70 years building the kind of brand loyalty that was supposed to survive moments exactly like this one. Consumers had always paid a premium for Rubbermaid. The dustpan that James Caldwell sold door to door in 1933 cost nearly 3 times what a metal one cost, and he'd closed 9 sales out of 10. Premium pricing wasn't just a strategy. It was the company's founding principle. But 1994 was not 1933, and the American retail landscape had undergone a transformation so complete that a company headquartered in a small Ohio city, focused on innovation and product quality, may not have fully grasped what it was dealing with. Walmart represented approximately 20% of Rubbermaid's total business. One customer, 1/5 of everything the company sold. Mass merchandisers collectively accounted for more than a quarter. This was not a diversified customer base. This was dependency, the kind of dependency that gives the customer leverage that no supplier, no matter how admired, can withstand. Schmidt informed Walmart of the price increases. Walmart's response was not a counteroffer. It was a warning. Raise prices and we pull your products from our shelves. Schmidt stood his ground. What followed was not a negotiation. It was not a business dispute resolved through compromise and mutual accommodation. What followed was the systematic dismantling of the most admired corporation in America by its single most powerful customer. Walmart's retaliation was swift, comprehensive, and designed not merely to punish, but to replace. The retailer refused to stock a number of Rubbermaid products entirely. It deleted Rubbermaid from its promotional materials, the circulars, the end cap displays, the in-store marketing that drove impulse purchases for millions of shoppers every week. When Rubbermaid raised toy prices specifically, Walmart dropped not just the toys but kitchen products as well, punishing across categories to send a message that extended far beyond any single product line. And then Walmart did the thing that turned a pricing dispute into a death sentence. It found replacements. Sterilite Corporation, a privately held manufacturer based in Townsend, Massachusetts, had been making plastic housewares since the 1930s. The company was lean, focused, and unburdened by the costs that weighed on Rubbermaid. No public shareholders demanding quarterly earnings growth. No massive research and development spending on 400 new products a year. No global expansion overhead. No executive infrastructure. Sterilite made functional plastic containers at the lowest possible cost, and it could operate on margins that would have horrified Rubbermaid's finance department. But here's the detail that turns the story from a simple tale of price competition into something more damaging. A former Rubbermaid sales executive later explained to Plastics News what actually opened the door. The reason Sterilite got it in the beginning was because Rubbermaid couldn't fulfill orders. Sterilite started to grow just filling in the gaps. Now, they have become a very dependable supplier. It wasn't just the price. Rubbermaid couldn't ship. The company that Fortune had ranked #1 in America couldn't reliably deliver its own products to the stores that sold them. Fill rates were poor. Deliveries were late. Retailers had been complaining about it for years, but the complaints had been absorbed by the glow of the brand's reputation. Now, with Walmart actively looking for alternatives, the shipping failures gave the retailer both the justification and the opportunity to act. Walmart featured Sterilite prominently in the shelf space that had belonged to Rubbermaid. The cheaper products, displayed where America's most admired brand used to sit, told a story that no amount of Fortune rankings could overcome. You can get something that does the same job for less money, and it's right here where Rubbermaid used to be. But the retailer didn't stop at substitution. The pressure campaign escalated into something that looked less like a customer relationship and more like economic coercion. Walmart used Rubbermaid products as loss leaders, pricing them below cost in its own stores, which cascaded through the entire retail market as other chains demanded matching price cuts to stay competitive. The retailer required Rubbermaid to deliver products within 2 days of being ordered. It fined the company for each dollar Walmart claimed it lost on late deliveries. It required Rubbermaid to buy back unsold merchandise. It dictated what types of products Rubbermaid should make and how to make them. A former Rubbermaid manager described the suffocation to the Akron Beacon-Journal. They backed us into a corner. We couldn't recoup our product development costs before they'd slash prices. That led to less innovation. At the company whose entire identity, whose entire reason for existence since Donald Noble set the clock in 1968, was innovation. The engine that had produced 400 new products a year was being starved of the revenue it needed to run. Meanwhile, Rubbermaid's competitors made a different choice. When resin prices doubled, they absorbed the costs. They accepted thinner margins. They maintained their retail relationships. They watched Rubbermaid, the industry leader, the company every one of them had spent decades trying to catch, walk into a confrontation with its most powerful customer and lose. Fortune's 1998 post-mortem was unsparing. Schmidt loudly blamed high raw material prices, and for a while they were indeed high. That's when Rubbermaid tried to pass along its higher costs to Walmart and got a painful lesson in who jerks whose chain these days. The numbers told the story with a brutality that no narrative could soften. In 1994, the year of the Fortune honor, the year of peak net income, the year the resin crisis began, Rubbermaid earned approximately $228 million on revenue of $2.17 billion. 1 year later, net income plunged 73%. After a $158 million restructuring charge, the company cleared roughly $60 million. The $250 million resin hit, combined with Walmart's retaliation, had blown a hole through the balance sheet that no amount of brand loyalty could fill. Schmidt's first response was to cut. 9 plants closed, 1,260 jobs eliminated. The projected savings, $50 million a year. It wasn't enough. In 1996, he reversed course on pricing, cutting across the board by an average of 1%. It was an acknowledgement, implicit, reluctant, far too late, that the 5% increase had been a catastrophic miscalculation. But the damage with Walmart was already done. You don't walk back a confrontation with your largest customer by quietly adjusting a price list. The relationship was broken. The shelf space was gone. Sterilite was entrenched. 1,200 more jobs were cut in 1996. The stock, which had peaked at $38.25 under Galt, drifted lower and never recovered. From January 1993 through September 1998, Rubbermaid shares lost 24% of their value. During the same period, the S&P 500 gained 132%. An analyst at Midwest Research delivered the verdict with the flatness of a man reading an autopsy report. You would have been better off buying T-bills 5 years ago than buying Rubbermaid. The Fortune ranking, that gleaming number 1, became a measuring stick for the speed of the fall. Out of the top 10 by 1997, down to 100 by 1998. In 4 years, the most admired corporation in America had fallen 99 places. Schmidt kept making acquisitions even as the core business deteriorated. Graco Baby Products in 1996, Curver Europe in 1997, Century Products in 1998. As if expansion could substitute for the revenue that Walmart had taken away. Senior managers were leaving at an alarming rate. Business Week ran a cover story titled, "The Revolving Door at Rubbermaid. Is CEO Schmidt's tough style driving executives away?" The board cut his bonus 44% in 1995, from $656,000 to $365,000, but never fired him. An anonymous retail executive summarized what the industry already knew. They've been such lousy shippers. Not on time, terrible fill rates, and their products cost too much. They show you a new product line and then tell you they can ship only a third of what you want. Jack Call, a prominent Ohio businessman, publicly called Schmidt a total butthead at a Cleveland Athletic Club event. It lacked eloquence. It did not lack accuracy. And Donald Noble, the man who had built the innovation engine, who had broken ground on the Akron Road campus, who had promised that Rubbermaid would always be a part of Wooster, still kept an office at headquarters. He watched everything he'd built being dismantled from the inside. His only public comment carried the weight of a man who had outlived his own legacy. I'm sad because we worked so very hard to keep Rubbermaid independent. By the fall of 1998, Rubbermaid was desperate enough to sell. Newell Company, based in Freeport, Illinois, had spent decades building a consumer products conglomerate through relentless acquisition. The company had started as a brass curtain rod manufacturer in 1903 and grown by buying mature businesses with what it called unrealized profit potential, companies making low technology, non-seasonal products that could be squeezed for higher margins through a proprietary process the company had named, with the clinical precision of an efficiency manual, Newellization. Newellization meant centralizing administration, consolidating operations, installing financial controls, optimizing supply chains for volume retailers, and enforcing 15% operating margins. It was mechanical, it was predictable, and it worked on small, straightforward acquisitions where the target company's primary problem was cost management. On October 21st, 1998, Newell announced the acquisition of Rubbermaid for approximately $5.8 billion. It was an all-stock deal. Rubbermaid shareholders received roughly $38.68 per share, a 49% premium over the battered trading price. The premium was large, but measured against what the stock had been worth under Galt, it was a surrender. The company that Fortune had called the most admired in America was being sold at a discount to its own history. The Akron Beacon-Journal captured the moment in a headline: "Sale of company gives Wooster identity crisis." Wolfgang Schmidt became vice chairman of the combined entity, a ceremonial title that amounted to a polite exit. One business publication's verdict was unsparing. It took Wolfgang Schmidt 5 years to weaken a company that others spent decades building into one of America's most admired corporations. Fortune compared the Rubbermaid board's passivity to IBM and General Motors in the early 1990s, but found them even more feckless. Those boards had eventually fired their CEOs. Rubbermaid's never did. Passive to the end, Fortune wrote, they finally delivered a weak shot of value to their shareholders by simply accepting another company's takeover bid. The shareholder votes occurred on March 11, 1999. The merger closed shortly after. The company was renamed Newell Rubbermaid Incorporated. 6 Rubbermaid directors joined the Newell board, and on the Akron Road campus, life continued for a while. The presses still cycled. The shifts still changed. The parking lots still filled before dawn. But the name on the building now belonged to someone else, and the decisions about Wooster's future were being made in Illinois. The acquisition was 10 times larger than Newell's previous biggest deal. It nearly doubled the company's size overnight. This was not the kind of target that Newellization had been designed to handle. Daniel Ferguson, the architect of the acquisition strategy, would later admit what the numbers eventually made obvious. We paid too much. First-year restructuring costs hit $241 million. Profits fell to $95 million on revenue of $6.41 billion. By 2002, the combined company had lost over $200 million in a single year and written off $500 million in goodwill. Newell shareholders lost 50% of their value in 2 years. Rubbermaid shareholders lost 35% of theirs. Business Week called it the merger from hell. Nobody argued. The dismantling of Rubbermaid's Wooster presence didn't happen all at once. It happened in waves, each one smaller than the last, each one taking another piece of what the town had known for 80 years. May 1999. Just months after the merger closed. 520 employees cut. The vice president of human resources assured the community that no further reductions were expected immediately. It was the kind of assurance that means nothing, and everyone knows it. Through 1999 and 2000, corporate headquarters operations migrated to Georgia. The executive offices that Donald Noble had built on Akron Road, the offices where Stanley Galt had worked 60-hour weeks and Schmidt had accepted the Fortune honor, they emptied. The decisions were being made somewhere else now. In November of 2003, a tornado struck the Rubbermaid facility in Wooster, causing approximately $20 million in damage. It was the kind of event that in another era would have triggered a rebuilding. In this era, it appeared to accelerate the final decision. On December 9, 2003, CEO Joseph Galley, a former Black & Decker executive brought in to execute the Newellization that the original management had failed to achieve, announced to financial analysts that the Wooster plastics plant would close. 850 production jobs would be eliminated. Employees were notified in a series of meetings. City officials and United Steelworkers. Local 302 were informed. Galley described the Wooster plant as a very high-cost operation. Production costs ran about 10% higher than the company's other facilities. He called it significantly costlier to operate. The language was clinical. The math was clear. The human meaning of the math was someone else's problem. Chuck Schaffer, the union president, later reflected on what the workforce had believed right up until the end. We knew the home products plants of Rubbermaid were being scrutinized, looked at, and I guess we were full of ourselves that we were going to be here, regardless. Full of ourselves that we were going to be here, regardless. It's the kind of sentence that only makes sense in a town where the factory had been running for 80 years. Where your father worked the presses and your grandfather worked them before that. Where the parking lot filled every morning and the company's name was on the store downtown. And the tax revenue funded the schools your kids attended. Of course, they believed they'd be there regardless. What else would they believe? The alternative was unthinkable, until the morning it became a meeting with management and a date on a calendar. The shutdown came in waves through 2004. 700 manufacturing and warehouse jobs eliminated by March, another 144 by late May, 53 more in June, each wave smaller. Each one taking another group of workers who had expected to retire from that floor. The last remnant held on for another decade. A distribution center, 800,000 square feet of warehouse space on the Akron Road campus, employed 110 people as late as 2011. Then, Newell Rubbermaid announced that it no longer made sense to transport products 80 miles round trip between manufacturing in Mogadore and distribution in Wooster. The center closed in 2013. Nearly 100 years of Rubbermaid operations in Wooster ended, not with a final shift or a ceremony, but with the last truck pulling away from a loading dock. The Chicago Tribune sent a reporter to Wooster in June of 2004, while the plant was still shutting down in stages. The dispatch opened with a sentence that carried more weight than anything a business analyst had written about the company's decline. Rubbermaid Incorporated was very good to the folks here in the rolling hills of rural Ohio, providing cradle-to-grave security for generations of faithful employees. Now, the company's flagship factory is shutting down, eliminating hundreds of good-paying jobs as the Rust Belt demons that have beset so many Midwest communities descend on this sheltered hamlet. Cradle-to-grave security. That's what the factory had meant. Not just wages, not just benefits. Security. The kind that lets you plan a life, buy a house, raise children with the confidence that the ground beneath you isn't going to shift. Rubbermaid had provided that for generations, and now it was gone. The fiscal damage was immediate and specific. The city lost roughly $600,000 in annual payroll taxes. The Wooster Public School District lost approximately $1 million. Wayne County lost nearly $304,000 in real estate taxes and another $1 million in personal property taxes. The Wooster schools laid off 90 of their 600 employees and closed an elementary school, directly attributed to the loss of Rubbermaid tax revenue. Voters eventually approved a substantial local tax increase to cushion the blow, reaching into their own pockets to replace what the company had once provided. Sandra Hull of Main Street, Wooster, delivered the verdict the town already knew. I don't think anyone believes you're going to attract another company with 1,200 manufacturing jobs. There will never be another Rubbermaid. Mayor Jim Howie. We've just never experienced anything to this magnitude before. We do have kind of an unusual community. It's a caring, giving community, and we just hope people will help people during these times. Professor Ned Hill of Cleveland State University framed it in the language of economics, but the meaning was the same. What you've got is a global productivity revolution, and Wooster is the latest victim. They're going through shock down there. Shock. That's the word that stays. Not anger, not bitterness. Shock. The disbelief of people who had organized their entire lives around an assumption that turned out to be wrong. The factory will always be here. Rubbermaid will always be Wooster. This is permanent. Nothing is permanent. Rubbermaid was the most prominent casualty. It was not the only one. Vlasic, America's #1 pickle brand, with more than a third of the market and 95% consumer awareness, negotiated a deal to sell a gallon jar of whole kosher dill pickles in Walmart for $2.97, displayed on pallets near the front of more than 3,000 stores. Walmart treated it as a statement piece, proof of what the retailer's buying power could deliver to the American consumer. The jars moved at 240,000 gallons per week, but the margin was a penny or two per jar at most, and the gallon jars began cannibalizing Vlasic's profitable business everywhere else. Consumers who used to buy spears and chips at the supermarket switched to the Walmart gallons instead. Vlasic's own executives watched families buy a gallon of pickles, eat a quarter of the jar, and throw the rest away when it went moldy. The volume was enormous. The profit was vanishing. When Vlasic asked for relief, even a modest increase to $3.49, Walmart's response was a threat against the company's entire product line. The gallon jar continued until a Walmart buyer finally acknowledged what had happened. They'd done to pickles what they'd done to orange juice. They'd killed it. Vlasic filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in January 2001. Lakewood Engineering and Manufacturing, a Chicago family business that had been making electric fans and heaters since 1946, watched Walmart transform a $20 box fan into a $10 one over a decade. To meet the pricing demands, Lakewood automated, laid off workers, pressured its own suppliers, and eventually sourced labor in China at 25 cents an hour. Walmart accounted for 80 to 90% of Lakewood's heater sales. When the retailer decided to source heaters entirely from China, Lakewood gave its workers notice and entered involuntary bankruptcy in 2009. Huffy, the largest bicycle manufacturer outside of Asia, based in Ohio, maker of over 2 million bikes per year, supplier of Olympic athletes, was ordered by Walmart to lower prices on a 900,000 bike purchase. Huffy couldn't make a profit at those prices. The company's unionized Ohio workforce took a pay cut that restored profitability for 2 years, before Walmart's pressure crushed margins again. The Salina, Ohio plant closed in 1998. All 935 employees lost their jobs. Production moved to Mexico, then China. Even offshore, the company couldn't make the numbers work. Huffy filed Chapter 11 in 2004. Its assets were turned over to Chinese creditors. A Demos.org report found that of the top 10 companies supplying Walmart in 1994, 4 had sought bankruptcy protection by 2006. The pattern was always the same. Each year, the retailer demanded lower prices, not as a negotiation, but as a requirement. For most suppliers, Walmart had become their single largest customer, often purchasing 30% or more of total output. To meet the demands, companies automated, reduced quality, moved production offshore, or accepted margins that couldn't sustain the business. The process was gradual enough that each individual concession seemed survivable. The cumulative effect was not. The former Rubbermaid campus on Akron Road found new tenants. In 2015, Gojo Industries, the maker of Purell hand sanitizer, leased 1.3 million square feet for manufacturing and distribution, investing in renovations and projecting 240 new jobs. The city offered tax incentives. The parking lot filled again, partially. Different cars, different workers, different products moving through the space where Rubbermaid storage totes had once emerged in bright primary colors by the thousands. Wooster didn't collapse. The population grew modestly, from about 24,800 in 2000 to 27,200 in 2020, though the most recent estimates show a slight decline. The College of Wooster endured. The J.M. Smucker Company in neighboring Orville, Schaeffler Manufacturing, Frito-Lay, and a constellation of mid-size employers absorbed some of the workforce that Rubbermaid left behind. Manufacturing still accounts for roughly 30% of Wayne County employment. The town adapted imperfectly, slowly, with scars that don't show in census data. The Everything Rubbermaid store on Public Square, the company outlet in the historic Quinby building, the place where you could walk in and buy the products your neighbors had made, closed for the last time on April 29th, 2021. The Daily Record headline, "A hard hit for downtown, a century of Rubbermaid in Wooster ending." By March of 2022, the space had reopened as an Ace hardware store, operated by a family connected to the local Bueller's grocery chain. The building had been purchased by two local businessmen specifically to preserve it. One of them explained simply, it was too important of a building to leave to chance. A TripAdvisor review of the now-vanished Rubbermaid store lingers in the digital record like a pressed flower in a forgotten book. I honestly like to go in and remember shopping at the old Anat's department store with my mom and grandma back in the 70s and 80s. The Rubbermaid brand still exists. It appears on food storage containers, trash cans, sheds, shelving, and laundry baskets. Products manufactured across a dispersed global network that includes facilities in Ohio, Mexico, and China. Rubbermaid Commercial Products still serves the janitorial and food service sectors, but the products are thinner now, lighter, cheaper. The thick, heavy, nearly indestructible Rubbermaid goods of the 1980s and early 1990s, the ones that justified a premium price because they lasted longer than anything else on the shelf, those are gone. The company introduced a line called take-alongs, thin-wall containers designed to compete with disposable alternatives. James Caldwell, who sold a $1 dustpan against 39-cent competitors because his was built to last, would not have recognized them. And Newell, the company that swallowed Rubbermaid whole, became a cautionary tale inside the cautionary tale. After acquiring Jarden Corporation for $15.4 billion in 2016, the company renamed itself Newell Brands. Activist investor Carl Icahn built a stake, won board seats, forced divestitures. The stock, which reached an all-time high of $54.44 in 1998, the year the Rubbermaid deal was announced, trades today at roughly $4.50. The company's entire market capitalization is now less than the price it paid for Rubbermaid alone. There is a particular kind of quiet that belongs to places built for noise. A factory floor that ran 3 shifts, 7 days a week for decades. The rhythmic cycling of injection presses, the hiss of pneumatics, the voices of workers calling across the line, the rumble of forklifts moving pallets to the loading docks. That floor develops a kind of acoustic memory. The building was designed to contain sound. The concrete absorbs it. The high ceilings amplify it. When the machines stop and the workers leave and the loading docks go dark, the silence doesn't feel like an absence. It feels like a presence. The ghost of the noise that used to live here. The Wooster Digital History Project recorded that after the 1998 buyout, a man in a crane replaced the Rubbermaid sign on the store downtown with one reading, "Everything Newell Rubbermaid." Somewhere a photograph exists of that moment, the old name coming down, the new name going up, the mechanical precision of institutional identity being physically stripped from a building on Public Square. Rubbermaid wasn't destroyed by a competitor who built a better product. It was not destroyed by changing consumer preferences, or by technological obsolescence, or by the kind of slow cultural drift that renders once essential things irrelevant. The products were good. The brand was trusted. The innovation was real. Consumers didn't stop wanting what Rubbermaid made. What happened was simpler and harder to accept. The company tried to pass along a cost increase to a customer powerful enough to say no. And when it said no, it didn't just refuse the increase. It replaced the supplier, punished the brand, and demonstrated to every manufacturer in America what happens when you forget who holds the leverage. Could they have seen it coming? The resin dependency was decades old. The distribution problems were documented. The shift in retail power from manufacturer to merchant had been accelerating for years. Perhaps Schmidt could have absorbed the costs, the way competitors did. Perhaps he could have invested in supply chain reliability before it became a crisis. Perhaps a different leader, someone with Galt's instinct for the factory floor, someone who understood that the relationship with your largest customer is the one thing you cannot afford to lose, might have navigated the resin spike without triggering the chain of events that followed. Perhaps. But standing at the summit in February of 1994, with the Fortune ranking glowing and 12,000 employees worldwide, and the parking lot on Akron Road filling every morning before dawn, standing there, it must have seemed impossible that a 5% price increase on dish racks and trash cans could bring the whole thing down. 9 men started this company in 1920 with $26,800 and a plan to make toy balloons. A man named Caldwell saved it with a red rubber dustpan and a 90% close rate on cold calls. Donald Noble set the innovation clock that made it great. Stanley Galt turned it into an empire that Fortune called the finest in America. It took 74 years to build and fewer than 5 to break. The brand still appears on products in every Walmart in America. Thinner, lighter, cheaper, made somewhere else. Sold by the very retailer that starved the company until it was desperate enough to be bought. If you drive down Akron Road in Wooster today, you can still see the complex. Different names on the buildings now. Different products inside. The parking lot fills with different cars, driven by people who work for companies that had nothing to do with the place when it mattered most. The injection presses that shaped Rubbermaid storage totes are gone. Sold, scrapped, shipped somewhere else. But the building is still there. The concrete endures in the way concrete does, indifferent to what it once contained, to the noise that once filled it, to the people who once walked its floors and believed, with every reason in the world, that this was permanent. What remains is the silence and the building that holds it.